So good afternoon or good morning. And this is October 10th, 2009. And this teleconference is on, well, it's on the lower self, really. And what I did was I'm going to be doing some presentations on the Pathwork book, The Undefended Self, which was written by Susan Basenga. And what her book does is she brings a lot of different concepts together and creates a synergy of these concepts, which are really useful for teaching, and they're a refreshing way to look at some of the material. So you don't have to have the book to understand the teleconference because it refers to several lectures, but you will have to have some knowledge of 3 or 4 lectures or look them up later. On the website, I have mounted a worksheet that has 3 pages of notes from The Undefended Self, and also some quotes from Lecture 14, which is Higher Self, Lower Self, and Mask, and also Lecture 134, The Concept of Evil, and a worksheet and a few other things. So the material is there on the web. You can download it in PDF format. What I did for this teleconference was I made an outline based on the chapter, and I just listed the subheadings that Susan made and thought that I would march through them and add to and go back and forth with them. If you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to go ahead and speak up. I'm happy to have your questions. In fact, I enjoy them. It gives me, number one, an idea what you might be thinking or what perceptions you might be having of the material. And secondly, it also can take us in some interesting directions. So I encourage you to consider that your questions could be relevant not only for you, but for others who are listening in. It's the wonderful quality of universality in this kind of material. So let's begin. The title of the chapter is called Facing the Lower Self. And the first point that she makes is that facing the lower self is, in effect, an act of the higher self. That being willing to confront what is distorted or not working or negative within yourself is a major turning point in spiritual work. Because the deepest work that you will be able to do will be the work on yourself, on your spiritual path, on your spiritual principles and values, and on how you act and react with the real world. This is, to some extent, the only true control that we have. All other control is illusory because it depends on the cooperation of other people, or even the cooperation of gravity, or the cooperation of timing and circumstance, or many, many other aspects. But the one thing that we can control absolutely, unequivocally, is our attitude towards what happens at any given moment. So in the act of turning around and facing the parts of us that aren't up to snuff, that aren't as enlightened as we would like them to be, and parts of us that simply enjoy negativity, in facing up to that part of us, what we are saying is, I will be willing to look at all. I will be willing to look at everything. And the phrase that Susan uses in this book a few times is to embrace. Now that may be confusing for some people. The term embrace does not mean accept, although there needs to be acceptance of what is. It doesn't mean that you approve of, or like, or enjoy what you see or what you are. But there is a quality of saying yes to it for what it is in that moment. It is the equivalent, you might consider.
Sorry about that. I have a camera that seems to want to turn off after 4 minutes sometimes. no matter how delicately or wonderfully I press the button. It simply says, nope, 4 minutes later I will turn off. So it's back on. So in terms of embracing your lower self, this is not an acceptance in the sense of I love you, I want you just the way you are, but rather an acceptance that that is the way we are. So in embracing your lower self, embracing the entirety of who you are, it allows you to have a willingness to look, and it is the willingness to look that creates an awareness. So the joke is, without awareness, you can't see anything. So no matter what your intentions are, no matter how good your intentions are, if you do the equivalent of walking along with your eyes closed, you're going to have limited perception and limited ability to see what's going on, to interact appropriately, and to address things that aren't going well. And by opening our eyes, sometimes it is quite true that we see things that upset us or distress us, that we wish were not there. We may feel shame about it, and we may feel despair about it. But still, it's important to have our eyes open to be able to see what is before we have any chance whatsoever of transforming what is. So in facing the lower self, we are changing the dynamic from simply, in lecture 127, the phrase is automatic reflex. And what's referred to there is that for a period of time we simply live life. And we're not going through self-examination. We're not looking inward as much. We're simply dealing with what comes at us. And then there comes a time where we slow down and we start asking questions and we start wondering what else is possible. And it is at this point that we go, based on lecture 127, from automatic reflex into awareness. Now, awareness does not solve things, but it is the next step. And for the understanding, which is step 3 in lecture 127, for understanding to begin, you need to see what's out there, what's happening, what's going on. And then step 4 of that lecture is a knowing, an inner acceptance and sense that you are comfortable with what is and ready to go on again. So facing the lower self being a major turning point in how we approach life. So what is the lower self? I like Susan's explanation in that she describes the lower self as the creative center of negativity. Consider that, the creative center of negativity. So there is negativity, but our lower self is where we work with it, where we enact it, where we are attracted to it, where we play with it. And the important thing to remember in that is creative center. So another point that she makes is that energy is like yin-yang. There is no bad energy, good energy. Energy just is. Energy can be used for negative purposes. Negative can also be used for positive purposes. So the lower self is a place where there's a congealing, there's a density of negative energy that is turning around and active and doing things. And so if you think of it like that, the transformation of the lower self becomes a matter of releasing that energy, of dissipating the negativity, releasing the energy so that it can be used for other purposes. So the second thing that our lower self is a defense against pain. Now I'll go into a moment about how the lower self begins to activate in human beings. But basically, the lower self is a defense against pain. The dilemma is it may be real pain or it may be imagined pain. It may be that we think something hurts, or we're afraid that it will hurt. And so we put up our defenses to prevent that from happening. Instead of, once again, using the word embrace, instead of reaching out and saying, yes, this is uncomfortable, this situation is uncomfortable. I don't like it. It upsets and frightens me, makes me nervous, but I still need to see what's here. I still need to explore it. That doesn't mean that I actively seek pain, but I don't necessarily automatically retract from it and do everything I can to avoid it. But the lower self doesn't want to experience pain on any level for any reason. And so as a defense, it doesn't judge whether pain is a growing pain or a necessary pain or an unfortunate but temporary. It doesn't make those evaluations. The lower self simply says pain bad, no pain good, and locks us into activities and attitudes where we will not experience more pain than we can possibly avoid. The third aspect of the lower self is that it is reaction. And in reaction, we are going into a sense of numbness. We are saying no to an experience. So keeping in mind that it's a creative center of negativity, it kind of knows that, and it is defended against pain. And one of the ways to defend against pain is to shut off feelings, so the lower self becomes numbness. It becomes reactionary in that it will not consider the value of something. It simply says good for me or bad for me, and makes a judgment based on limited goals and vision, and negates anything that doesn't feel good or comfortable for it. So it's a reaction, and it acts out of numbness because to some degree it has shut off feelings as part of its defense against pain. So that's what the lower self is. The distinction between lower self and evil is explained as evil being a splitting off of consciousness. So again, in a later point, I'll talk about some of the religious and karmic and stuff. But in terms of the splitting off of consciousness, the Pathwork presents that life, human life, is a school for learning and transformation. And that in this school, if you want to take that analogy just a little bit further, let's say we go through grades. Instead of incarnations or lifetimes, it's like we go through different classes and different experiences, moving up the evolutionary spiritual ladder so that we have more and more awareness, and we are transforming more and more of this closed off, numb, fearful attitude and becoming more enlightened, more willing, allowing our heart to open. But evil goes back to the initial split. The cosmology of the guide parallels most of the religions and philosophies, religious philosophies that humans have developed. And that is that there was some kind of initial separation from the divine. And in that separation, there's a no. Rather than an I want to explore, wouldn't this be interesting, let's all have fun together. There's a rejection of the divine that creates a split, that creates a separate type of consciousness. And this is the concept of evil that Pathwork works with. So what happens with the lower self in terms of human form is that we wind up interacting with evil, being attracted to it, allowing it in our lives, not taking care to keep it contained or away from us. Because the split of evil, the split of consciousness, actually feels like there is less pain. In that separation from the divine, we cut off our sensitivity, become more separate, more alone, and yet more numb can feel like a positive. It can feel calmer, quieter, even safer to be separated from the divine. Because the divine really represents an ongoing transformation, purification, and awareness. And awareness, one of the ways I explain this is when your arm or your leg goes numb, you have a moment where you realize that the limb has gone numb. And then you move it. And what has happened is there has been a slight pinch in the nerve or a decrease in blood to the limb. And because of that, the nerves in the limb have gone numb. They don't have enough oxygen and food to do their process. So they've gone numb. They have in effect shut down. And then you make a slight movement and the blood comes rushing back and the nerves wake up and you get pins and needles. And the pins and needles can feel intense. It can almost make your eyes water. It feels so ferocious and terrible. And what can you do? You can't stop it from enacting and you can't turn it off. So we all kind of breathe deeply and wait for just a few moments for that intense sensation to subside. And then the arm or leg returns to normal. Imagine, if you would, if when we made that slight adjustment and those pins and needles started, we could shut it down again. Imagine if we said, that hurts. That's too intense. I can't bear that. I just can't stand it. I'm going to turn it off. Oh, that's much better. Your arm or leg would die. The tissues, after being cut off for X amount of time, would die, and the limb would become gangrenous. It would begin to rot. And eventually, if you didn't cut it off or have someone help you out, your whole organism would die because of this dead organ, this dead limb, that would then poison your system. And yet, when we do that on an emotional level, we do not see the consequences. There are consequences. One of the lectures that I'm going to teach later this year is 196, Commitment, Cause and Effect. And one of the things that lecture talks about is that when you separate cause and effect, when you have an effect that is so far away from the cause that you cannot see the connection between the two, you lose awareness of what's happening. In effect, you can no longer do anything about it because you don't know why something is happening. So emotionally, when you, for instance, feel lonely and afraid and you open your heart, you might have the feeling that is very, very similar to the pins and needles in your arm. You may feel overwhelmed. You may feel the intensity of your own loneliness. You may open your heart and find that your friends are delighted and they say things like, "Where have you been? What have you been doing? We've called and we've tried to contact you," it's loving and wonderful chatter, but sometimes it feels like a criticism and we suddenly feel like we've done something wrong. But the overwhelm of suddenly being open again to input from other people and to our own feelings can feel so intense and so overwhelming that we once again shut it down. Imagine, if you would, a cycle of this where we keep shutting down any level of intense feelings having to do with reenacting or resuscitating friendships. After a while, people wander away. After a while, people decide you don't want to be friends. You show no interest, you never contact them. And so the stimulus goes away, and then of course you can open up and you won't feel that kind of intensity from the outside. And because there is no outside stimulus, you may not notice your own feelings. So you open up then and you say, now I feel comfortable. Now I feel that I can open my heart. And yet you are opening your heart to a much more limited experience. So what I'm describing here is that just like the physical, we may have to learn to tolerate. We may have to learn to bear with, grit our teeth and just get through it on intense emotional experiences, just like we let our arms and our legs wake up. Because by turning away that intense experience, we do not re-enliven, we do not re-engage, and we lose awareness of our feelings and of the situation. Now, what I'm describing here is that evil, in the Pathwork understanding, evil is a separation where you have managed to cut off the interaction. And you may have been able to cut off the feelings so that you are isolated and alone. There's a chilly, cold quality to that, which has truth in it, because evil tends to want things under control and slow. And that's not real. So evil is creating an artificial environment where it can control everything and shut down outside input and shut down any internal feelings that want to come forward that it doesn't feel comfortable with. So it is this quality of separation and falseness that the Pathwork concept of evil works with. So you have the lower self, which is a creative center of trying to enact this. How do I separate? How do I shut down these feelings? How do I avoid? It's a very creative and active center. But then you have the underlying principle of evil, which is, I don't want to play. I don't want to love. I don't want to be with other people. I don't want to give up any control. I want it all for myself. But the quality of evil is very cold and deliberate, and the lower self is more of an alive, once again, creative center. So it's talking about the difference, a bit of difference between the lower self and evil. Then there's an element or a section on the denial of the lower self. And these aren't necessarily logical, it's just a flow of information. In the denial of the lower self, basically what we say, when I described evil, and I said evil shuts off all the input so that it can be in the illusion that that doesn't exist or matter. In the denial of the lower self, in the refusal to look at our negativity, in the refusal to see where we are stubborn or resistant or selfish, that is a form of separation. So the denial of the lower self, the refusal to see it, is a form of evil. Now, human beings deny a lot of things. One of the things that Susan analogizes this to is the fear of death. So it's a great analogy, it's a common analogy, that we may deny, for instance, that we have an illness because we simply cannot face our own mortality. We don't want to believe that life is going to be over very, very soon. We don't want to believe that we're going to have to undergo a certain kind of experience. So we simply say it's not there. Now, that doesn't change the illness. And since life is mortal, since we're all terminal with life, it works the same way on a very, very long road. My words are not elegant this evening. Denial of an illness is just a shorter, simpler version of the denial of our ultimate death. It's easy to avoid death when you've got 90 years to work with, because that's a long time period. When that time period is shortened and a doctor tells you you have 3 months, once again it intensifies the whole experience. And because we really don't wake up in the morning saying this is the first day of the rest of my life, and this is I've just lost 1 day and I have 1 less day to live. We don't live like that. When we are told that we have a illness that is going to terminate our life early, it feels healthier, and as if we would be healthier and happier if we just say that doesn't exist, and we just kept living our life the way it was going before that. Now, it doesn't change the illness. It just means that we don't deal with it. So while it may be true that you go along for a period of time and you're relatively speaking happy, whereas if you faced your disease you might be miserable and upset, you also may not have the opportunity to end your life the way you wish. In effect, it's like getting zapped one day. You're going along and your life ends abruptly. If you know that your life is going to end in a matter of months, you actually have a special opportunity to live those few months in a very, very special and extra aware way, so that you get as much life as possible into those 3 months. So what I'm presenting here is that the denial of the lower self is just like denying that we have an illness. It won't stop the illness. It is possible that the illness could get worse or accelerate. It's not going to necessarily just go away. Denying the lower self does not mean it goes away. It doesn't heal, it doesn't transform. And because we're not aware of it, we are losing connection to cause and effect. So if we deny our lower self, which is the cause of things, and then we act out negatively, but we have denied the cause, then we may not know why we act out in a certain way. And because we don't understand why, we can't track it back and we cannot deal with it. So the denial of the lower self is equivalent to the denial of death. It won't change anything, and it breaks the chain between cause and effect. Now, there are 3 particular aspects of the lower self, and they are set out in the lecture 30, which is the pride, self-will, and fear. And when you study the lectures, it's a lot of material, it's a lot of words, so we tend to try to comb through all this stuff by making charts and graphs and saying, okay, what 3 points are we talking about, and making matrices and tables and charts. And the guide talks a lot in 3s, which perhaps is a human thing. I don't know why 3 is so prevalent. So the defenses of pride, self-will, and fear match up to the personality types of reason, will, and emotion, which is lecture 43. And the reason I'm mentioning so many lectures in this presentation is this is a synthesis of a lot of information, a way of, if you've read 10 different lectures, of bringing all those lectures together and seeing things a bit differently based on all the concepts, rather than looking at one single concept at a time. That's why I thought I would change the way I was doing things and work with this kind of synthesis, partly to liven it up, and partly because we have been talking about these individual lectures, and I'm trying to bring them into a larger context. So the personality defenses of pride, self-will, and fear are the lower self aspects of our personality types. And pride, why is pride a defense? Because pride is how we say, I don't have to look at that. It is beneath me to think that I would do such a thing. I am better than that. Pride says, I am better than others. So I should not have to do the kind of work other people do. I'll take care of it by myself. I shouldn't have to go to classes. I shouldn't have to take personal sessions. I shouldn't have to look at myself. And especially if we have a superficiality to our life that is basically in good shape, it's a justification. We must be doing something right because, you see, we have a good job and we have finances and we have friends and we have a relationship. What's there to look at? That may have truth in it. But what I'm talking about is when we say that out of pride, out of a sense of superiority meant specifically to prevent self-analysis, to stop examination, rather than consciously and intelligently say, I don't think I need to worry about that particular aspect at this particular time. That might be self-analysis. But pride simply takes a huge brush and says, I'm better than that. I shouldn't have to do that. I don't have that problem. Which is different from coming to that conclusion after self-examination. So the quote from Lecture 30 is that he who feels the humiliation of another person less than his own has too much pride. Let me repeat that. He who feels the humiliation of another person less than his own still has too much pride. That is the kind of pride I'm talking about. In real empathy, when you see someone humiliated or shamed, your heart might go out to them, and you might find that there's places in you that understand how that feels, and you would empathize with that other human being needing or having to feel those feelings. But when you see someone's humiliation and you do not access those feelings in you, that's due to pride. We don't want to feel those feelings. We want to pretend that we are not the kind of person that has been humiliated or needs to be humiliated. And this is where pride is what makes us laugh and point at other people. Look at him. Oh, isn't he stupid? Isn't he funny? Who would say that if they could remember in their own heart what it feels like to be humiliated? So this is what the guide means. Basically what he's saying is that you need to feel the other person's pain, humiliation, whatever it is, as much as you would feel your own. That is when your heart is open. And to not feel that is an indication of pride. So the antidotes to pride are honest self-confrontation and humble self-acceptance, out of which real self-esteem comes. So like other element, pride in and of itself is not a bad thing. It just is. You can have pride about an appropriate event or an appropriate action. But when pride is intended to separate you or prevent you from feeling feelings that you find uncomfortable, that's when pride has become a defense. So with pride, self-will, and fear, the next one is self-will. And self-will is not free will. Free will is the ability to choose. When we are in self-will, we actually lose the ability to choose because self-will has already taken a side. Self-will has decided what's good for me is what I'm going to put energy into, vote for, be with, fight for, say, or do. Self-will has already chosen me over you. So self-will is a defense that says, I want everything my way. Then I won't be upset. Then I won't have feelings of fear. I won't hate you if I have everything I need. Well, having everything you need or not having everything you need shouldn't necessarily result in hatred of another. So having everything you need is a defense against feeling the possibility that you may have hatred regardless. So to prevent your feeling of hatred, you accumulate things around you so that you feel comfortable and happy. And then you feel like you don't feel hatred. But the reality is the hatred's still there. It is simply not activated. And this is an example of how we deny the lower self by simply doing whatever it takes so that it's not disturbed or activated. That's not transforming the thing. That is, in effect, pacifying it. One of the phrases I use is feeding the lions. So if you have a lion who's hungry and your solution is to feed the lion, that's fine as long as you've got a basket of steaks. But the day is going to come when you run out of food to feed the lion. And so if you have not dealt with the possibility that the lion could be hungry and there's nothing left but you to eat, the chances are that at that point you will have no other option but to be eaten by the lion. There's a place where you may want to feed the lion for a while you figure out other options. You find a cage, you find a lion tamer, you do whatever it is you have to do. But to feed the lion without having an alternative plan, without thinking things through, without considering what happens when you run out of steaks, that's what happens when you pacify and do not activate the lower self without actually dealing with it. One day, you're not going to be able to have everything you need, to have all the control you think you have to do. And in that moment, you will become activated, and your lower self will erupt without necessarily having any opportunity on your part for, you haven't planned for this, you haven't made any arrangements, and you haven't started the work of a self-analysis. So when lower self erupts and reaches out and roars like a lion, it could act out negatively. And you may be very, very surprised by the feelings that may come out of you because you haven't really addressed them. You're not aware of them and you haven't dealt with them. So back to self-will. So self-will says, I want what I want when I want it. And self-will occurs when free will is used in the service of the little ego. So in other words, when I use my free will only in service of me as an individual, that's a very small version of me. What all spiritual paths teach is that there is a greater me, a greater us, a greater you. And that enlightenment, part of enlightenment, is about seeing the other person's needs and realizing that sometimes we need to give way on our needs to meet their needs because they are us. And in that larger sphere, and I've spoken of the 3 spheres of consciousness before, in that larger sphere of us, when you have what you need, I do have more happiness. And the planet has more happiness. But when I only take care of me, the chances are that I may be neglecting you or overlooking you, or somebody's going to get neglected and overlooked because I'm certainly not looking after them. And so when I only take care of me, and then someone is left out, and they become activated and they act out negatively, then to some degree, I bear some responsibility for that. I created a situation where someone was ignored. I ignored them. Now, I'm not talking about a situation where you have no authority or no power, and you can't help what's going on in the world. I'm talking about an attitude of seeing the needs of others and considering that perhaps your needs need to be adjusted so that all of us can have a bit more joy, a bit more happiness. To some extent, there's a lot of noise. If somebody could hit *6 and silence their phone, please. To some extent, that's what taxation is about. In almost any government, taxation takes a little bit from everyone and puts it in a pool and tries to make sure that the community's needs are met. And sometimes that means that an individual gets some help, and sometimes that just means that the community is taken care of in ways that an individual might not notice if they were only looking after themselves and their family. So in a community, there are needs that are very subtle and get forgotten. But by pooling resources and having somebody in charge of taking care of the greater need, we are all better off. So I'm describing where self-will is selfish, where it is it hasn't got any foresight, it doesn't plan, it doesn't see ahead, it doesn't look at the other, and therefore to some degree it is actually acting against its own interests by being selfish. So this is a defense, and it is designed to give me everything I want when I want it, without any regard at all for you and your needs, or a lesser regard for you and your needs. And in that way, I defend against my feelings of not having enough, and I also deactivate or keep unactivated my lower self, which might be angry and grab something from you. Now, I haven't healed that, I haven't addressed it, but it's not active because I've been somewhat selfish and taken care of myself first. That's why we speak of it as a defense. The last defense is actually underneath the other two. And the last defense is fear. And fear is what says there might not be enough. Fear says if we feel those feelings of empathy with the person being humiliated, we will feel destroyed and we will feel feelings that we can't handle. And so let's not do that. There is a fear of experiencing feelings that drive us to numb ourselves and block off those feelings. Rather than being willing to feel them, just go ahead and feel them and see how it goes. And finding out that it will not destroy you, it may make you uncomfortable. And it may bring up some things that you want to look at, but it will not kill you to experience something. Now that's where fear, I like using biology with concepts because it helps ground me. It helps me feel that I understand the concept when it's concrete and it talks about something specific. So in the lecture on the defense, which is 101, the guide talks about defense being a result of an overuse of adrenaline, because we have mistakenly presumed that our lives are in danger. Now, on a physical level, when our lives are in danger, the adrenaline pumps into our bloodstream and heightens our senses and gives us extra energy and allows us to do amazing things because our lives are at stake and we must do something about it. But humans aren't simply their biology. Human beings also use the biology of their being as a construct in their mind. And so a human being will say, my social life is in danger if I misbehave. And your mind will translate that into life or death. Your mind will translate a bit of humiliation into the threat of annihilation on a social level. And so what happens is we take the biology of our being, we translate it into the mental aspect of our being, and we invent stuff. So at that point, fear is ungrounded. Fear isn't rooted in death or life. It's not rooted in starvation versus survival. it becomes more and more subtle. And the definition of dying versus living turns into making a faux pas at the dinner table instead of falling over a cliff. So our reaction to making a small social error becomes gigantic. We're actually using our biology, and we will pump adrenaline through us. We will imagine that we are in absolute danger, making some small social mistake. And we will pump up our body and become more active and become more aware, and the adrenaline will course through us. We'll actually get a little bit nervous and shaky. This is because our mind is generating life or death scenarios over concepts. So that's why fear becomes a defense instead of a life-affirming tool. So where fear might save the animal from being eaten, what it does for us as human beings is we imagine a fear and we do whatever it takes to make the fear go away. The problem is the fear may not be real. So in service of the lower self, the fear would say, I don't want to feel those feelings. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. It makes me nervous. It makes me upset. Shut that down. And it can treat that situation as if it's a lion or a tiger. So that it says, get away, go away, shut the door, quit the job, cut off the relationship, don't go outside, stay inside, don't expose yourself, stay hidden, don't give to the other, because then you might feel these feelings of being bereft, of not having, and you might act out negatively, and that would get you disliked. So don't give. Hold on to things. Then these feelings will not be activated. But what is speaking there is fear. And it's a special kind of fear because it's not grounded in reality. We have control of it in our minds, and we allow it free rein to tell us whatever we want to hear. So I'm going to go back to what I said in the beginning, and that is the only thing that you have total and complete control of is your attitude. In this example of fear, if you decide that you will simply not be afraid of losing your job, I've been in that situation a couple of times where I have felt that I didn't really want the job in the first place. And sometimes I have felt that way because they can't afford to fire me. So I can do almost anything I want, and I'm so crucial, and they have nothing to replace me with, so they're going to let me do. I have no fear of getting fired. On the other hand, if I was going to get fired in other situations, I didn't care. Either way, I can use this lack of fear about losing a job to either slack off and do what I please, or move through projects that might ordinarily wind up in discussion and committees and management decisions. But if I have the courage to say, no, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to push it through, I'm going to do it, that ability to move with courage can actually come from the fact that I have decided I am not afraid. And the decision not to be afraid is an individual judgment. When I decide I can be fired, when I decide I can lose my job or lose my home or walk away from a relationship, I have decided that I will not be annihilated by that. And the fact that I'm broke, the fact that I don't have money, the fact that I would be lonely, the fact that I would have to make other major changes in my life, it's a choice on my part whether I decide to be afraid of that or not. So what I'm building here is that fear is actually a choice. Unless you have a very simplistic, fundamental situation facing you, to be afraid of something is a choice. And because it is a choice, we do misuse it. And we decide to be afraid of change. We decide to be afraid of awareness. we decide to be afraid of growth and transformation. And we allow fear to flood us, and then we justify what we do based on, but I'm afraid, without realizing that we have chosen. And what I've gone through in the first half are the sub-points in that chapter, starting with facing the lower self and what that means from a spiritual perspective. What is the lower self? What is evil? The denial of the lower self. And I've just completed a description of 3 aspects of the lower self in terms of defending against life. And those primary defenses are pride, self-will, and fear, which are outlined in Pathwork Guide Lecture 30. So the next point is what the lower self is not. And that's important because it's easy to think that every negative experience is an experience of the lower self, but that's not what the lower self is. So focusing on one emotion, anger. Anger in general is not a fun emotion to have. Not that we can't occasionally enjoy blowing out a little bit of anger, but in general, anger is anger because we are unhappy. It is a visceral, it's almost a defensive emotion, and it is designed to stop something from happening, to bark. It is the human equivalent of barking, to stop someone from doing something, to draw attention to stop the energy in a room. So that when we speak up in anger, people naturally turn around, stop talking, and wonder what's going on. Unless, of course, there is so much anger in the room that our voice is not the only one. Anger is not inherently an act of the lower self. Anger is not related to evil. Anger simply is. But anger is also not inherently righteous. You can be angry for no good reason. You can be angry because your toy got taken away. You can be angry because you weren't prepared to share and now you're worried, and your worry has made you feel threatened, so you bark back in distress. So anger just is. It's an indication that something is wrong, that something needs to change, that movement needs to happen or action needs to happen. That's all it is. It's a signal. Now, when anger is repressed and we're not allowed to express it, that's where we get in trouble. Because the repressed anger doesn't go away. And what it does, if you can think of it like an emotion being like a small animal, and if it's allowed to just be who it is and do what it needs to do, and it's done, and then it comes back and sits down and waits for another opportunity or another situation to express what it needs to express. So I'm imagining a whole bunch of white mice in front of me, and like a bunch of little bells, and each white mouse contains a different emotion. And when it's time for anger to express itself, the anger mouse expresses anger. And when that's done and the action generates the action that it needs to generate, it stops something, it moves something, it addresses something, then the little mouse comes back and just sits down and waits until the next time anger is appropriate. But if you, in effect, repress that anger, emotions don't go away just because you don't express them. In fact, what happens, it's as if that little animal, that little piece of anger, gets even angrier. Because now it has the original event, but it also has not being able to express itself. And it goes underground. It holds the energy in, and the energy gets more dense and to some extent more powerful because it's condensed. You've got a little mushroom cloud that's being held in. And the next opportunity it has to express anger, it may express a larger amount of anger because it's doing a 2-for-1 job. It's expressing anger over 2 situations, but it only has 1 event to express it at. Imagine that happening 50, 100, 1,000 times. We're not computers. We don't keep track of all this stuff. We lose count of the number of times where we felt angry or upset and did not express it and swallowed it and tried to pack it away someplace. So humans are usually not very conscious of the extent of their repressed emotions. And therefore, when an opportunity comes and those emotions are allowed to come out, they whoosh out. They come out in droves. And we say, I wonder why I'm so upset. Why am I crying so hard? Why am I so angry? Why am I giddy with happiness when it was only a joke? Well, part of that is because we had other moments of anger or sadness or joy that had to be held back. And they're like little kids. Let's go out and play. And they jump out and they put more energy into the event where they're allowed to express themselves than the situation actually calls for. That's one of the ways we distinguish between a feeling and an emotion or emotional reaction. So an example of that is if I'm angry, if somebody steps on my foot and I feel pain and I say, get off my foot, and they get off my foot, I'm done. Imagine if I was under a social situation where I could not express my irritation or fear of physical harm because I was subordinate to the people in the room. And they jostled me and stepped on my feet and nudged, and I felt twinges of pain or threats of pain or discomfort all day long, and I wasn't allowed to express it. The phrase I use to describe what happens then is, in another situation, I do the equivalent of kick the dog. I try to find a situation where I can express that pent-up frustration and anger. And when I get that opportunity, all that frustration and all that anger goes pouring out in that opportunity. What does this have to do with the lower self? When we do that, we are in effect acting out some negativity. It's not just a matter of a pent-up set of emotions. We have feelings about not being able to express ourselves in the appropriate circumstance. So besides the fact that I was jostled in a crowd where I'm a subordinate and I'm not allowed to express my feelings, added to the anger and distress is resentment. And added to that can be a dozen other feelings. I can be angry that I took the job in the first place. I can be angry that the people I'm associating with are that inconsiderate. I can be angry that other people aren't looking out after me and that I'm on my own and I can't handle the situation, so I keep having to swallow the anger and distress. All those, you can feel it, is all going into me. It's being added to by a ton of other frustrations and negative feelings that were in there in the first place. It's making quite a soup. And then, when I have an opportunity to release these feelings, I don't necessarily know why I'm so upset and angry. And where the lower self comes into this is when I am furiously angry at the dog, or the child, or the spouse, or the news, my lower self will egg me on. My lower self will justify my behavior. It will tell me, you ought to be angry at that politician or that murderer. The dog wasn't supposed to do that. You've told the dog 1,000 times. Children should not be undisciplined. You needed to be angry at that child. And your spouse never listens, and it gives you a whole list of the times they didn't listen. So he deserved your anger. It may have been a bit too much, but that's okay. It was still well deserved. That's where the lower self, the negativity, mixes into the natural and rightful not righteous, but rightful anger. And it allows you to act out negatively and act out with negativity, and tells you not to feel bad about it. Now, if you can imagine that happening day after day, month after month, year after year, where you suppress emotions from one situation and let them pour out inappropriately in other situations as a solution, and your lower self is encouraging you and saying you're justified. All you have to do is find any justification, and it's okay to let all these feelings out, even though they belong someplace else. This is how good people, caring, decent people, wind up creating negative, bad habits where they act out inappropriately, and they actually don't see it that way. Because, number one, they feel justified. They've built up the justification in their own minds. And secondly, they're not completely aware of where all these feelings have come from. So when the cause, the thing strikes a match or lights the tinder that seems appropriate, it seems like that was the situation that generated those feelings. But it only generated a few feelings, and it caught the rest of the feelings that you were repressing. So what I'm speaking of now is that the lower self is not anger. It is not a negative feeling. It is not grief. It is not sadness. It is nothing in particular. That is not lower self. What lower self is the desire to justify, hurt, and punish. In part because we have shifted from the original situation to a substitute situation. And we want to resolve one set of feelings in a different arena where they really don't belong. And when we're angry and we don't really know why we're angry and we're looking for justifications, that's when it becomes blame. That's when it's your fault that I'm angry. I wouldn't be angry if you hadn't done this. And the question to ask is, why does that situation make you so angry? What is going on? Circling around to self-analysis and being willing to look at our lower self and our negative acting out. So what I was expressing here is that lower self is not basic emotions. Lower self is channeling those negative emotions into actions that we claim are justified, where we are trying to hurt or punish someone rather than resolve a situation. So the next topic is uncovering the lower self. And again, I think her words are delicious. Susan Thasenga's words are delicious and juicy. She says, the lower self is a dangerous, exciting, and scary terrain for most of us. It is both repellent and attractive. While we find violence repugnant, it nonetheless fascinates us. Lower self energies give us a kind of permission to go places that we know we shouldn't go to. And it gives us justifications and excuses to explore territories that fascinate us, that hold danger, that hold negativity, and perhaps we shouldn't be in. So there's a collusion here in us between the energy of the lower self and our natural, healthy curiosity and our fascination with aspects of life that we don't fully understand. But if you follow that fascination and you follow that interest and curiosity from a positive perspective, that would create one result. But when you allow the lower self to tell you it's okay to shout in this circumstance, that person's guilty, so you can enjoy the sense of being righteous. Go ahead, inhabit that, because you have justification. The person did the crime or lied or whatever the person did. So in uncovering the lower self, what we need to see is how we have distorted reality and justified our negativity. And one of the previous teleconferences focused on the observer self, also covered in this book. And in that process of developing the observer self, we develop a part of us that can notice. And one of the things that we notice is, gee, that's a lot of energy going over there. That's a lot of anger going to the television screen or to the referee in the sports game. Is that, are we bleeding off from another situation into there? What are we doing? The observer self is what holds, once again, a referee position and says, what's going on here? Where does the anger come from? And begins to notice, oh, you know the other day when you got yelled at in front of the other people and you were angry and you were so upset that you weren't able to verbalize your feelings? And then 2 days later you're shouting at the television screen? Or you're upset about something that should only make you annoyed? There's a cause and effect there. There's a connection between those two events. That's the position that the observer self can take. So in uncovering our lower self, we need to start seeing beyond our immediate feelings, our immediate situation. And we need to bring in the equivalent of the larger part of us that holds other values. Values of tolerance, values of patience, values of love, values of wanting to see both sides of a situation. The defenses of pride, what Susan says is, the defenses of pride, self-will, and fear keep us trapped within a narrowly egotistic self-definition that further rationalizes our disconnection from others. And again, it is in the disconnection from others that we, in effect, become evil. When we don't care that we're wrong. When we don't bother to look because we do not wish to change our attitudes. That's where evil enters into the life of a good person. So if we're not aware of how the lower self enters into our lives and how it activates us, how it gives us these justifications, then it is in effect allowed to roam free and do whatever it pleases, as long as it allows us to feel good about who we are and what we're doing. But in the feeling good about, there's this voice that says it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be extra angry. There's this voice of justification that is encouraging us to go in a certain direction of negative acting out. And that voice is usually quite different from the voice that says, wait a minute, what's going on? What's happening here? That's a lot of emotion for a simple event. There's a difference in those two voices. So I'm laughing because I also did the teleconference on meditation for 3 voices, where you kind of sit down and have a discussion with the different voices in you. This is what it sounds like. You have to hear the voices, or you have to create a situation where you can observe those voices and notice. This is the work of self-examination. Again, she starts to mention the creative power of the lower self, the yin-yang, the fact that all energy just is energy. And you can use energy for negative purposes, and you can use energy for positive purposes, and it can feel good to exercise energy. It can feel good to run. The question is, are you running to help someone? Or are you running to catch someone and punish them? Because then you feel exhilarated and righteous. The energy can be very hard to tell. It can be very hard to tell the difference between those two energies in situations. But that's our job as a spiritual being. If we do not bother to tell the difference, then we in effect stay children. We stay undeveloped beings for the rest of our life. And as undeveloped beings, we will live a life that is unenlightened. And an unenlightened life, which is not examined, may not be what we want our lives to be. So this is perhaps one of the genesis of the phrase, we create our own reality. Again, if you understand that your attitude is the one thing that you can control, that no one else can take from you. No one else can make you unhappy unless you agree that you're unhappy. So they can do anything they want to you, but if you simply decide, I'm okay, I'm happy. If not happy, content. If not content, at least I'm not miserable. There are degrees, but they are still controlled by you. You can also say, I'm a little bit unhappy or a little bit miserable, instead of I'm absolutely miserable and I want to fix this and it's and making a huge giant drama out of it. It is possible to be unhappy and just sit with that and hold it and try to create circumstances where you can move into a more joyous situation without a demand, without fear, and the demand being self-will, the fear being some invention in your mind that if I'm unhappy for 5 minutes, I'll be unhappy for 5 years, and without the defense of pride, which is this isn't right, I shouldn't be unhappy, I deserve better. All of these defenses really don't address the possibility that under those circumstances, any reasonable person would be unhappy. So you are actually in touch with reality. It is an unhappy situation. And by truly sitting with those feelings, you may then become motivated to act, to change those situations. Instead of drumming up a lot of emotion and getting very upset and acting out and moving, which will shift the feelings, but not necessarily address what created the situation in the first place. So there's a creative power in the lower self to move energy, and yet we are always responsible for the energy that we move. Origins of the lower self. The lower self is a natural quality of human beings. Everybody has a lower self. The lower self is activated in childhood, early in childhood, where you simply don't get everything you want. You have a lot of beings around you who get to do what they want, and they're all telling you what you can and cannot do. It is a reaction against circumstances that we don't like. So the lower self generates in childhood even good children who are good on the outside. It takes a psychologist to go in there and find out if they're simmering with rage, but have decided to play the game a certain way because they think they can make the game give them what they want. So appearances can be deceiving, and I'm just going to make a broad statement. Every human being has lower self. It is activated in childhood. But depending on 1,000 different qualities of who we are as a spiritual being, what our parents are like, what our personality is like, what the circumstances are like, all those are going to impact how we deal with lower self energies, how they manifest, and whether or not, for instance, our family, and this is true of most families, will allow certain lower self energies license and the ability to move while repressing other lower self energies. What am I saying? Some families, many families, refuse to let children get angry, but they might actually be supportive of crying. Oh, poor thing. Yeah, you just cry. You just come over here and cry. We understand that. But if you're angry, I feel affronted. And you stop that. Don't you yell at me. And yet the source of both those feelings could be the same event. And so what happens to us as children is we realize that anger needs to be stopped and repressed, but this other feeling is encouraged and allowed to flow. And the energy from repressed anger may find the channel of the feelings that are allowed to be expressed. And so we become like a tree that has to lean a certain way because of interference. And the tree doesn't stop growing. It begins to grow in the direction that it is allowed to grow in. So the origin of the lower self in childhood, then the child does not stop feeling or living. The child simply finds ways for the energy to express itself and act out and move. So all of us are trying to find an acceptable way to move the energy of our feelings and to express ourselves. And depending again on our personalities, we will find the open doors we'll go through, and the closed doors, after battering on them for a period of time, we'll ignore them and go where the energy can move. The Pathwork Guide uses a phrase called the mass image of self-importance, which refers to the childish qualities that humans have that they keep throughout their lifetime. Many people are childish throughout their lifetime, meaning that they are only concerned with what they want and how they feel, and getting what they feel is acceptable and holding at bay what they feel is unacceptable, without trying to take a larger perspective. So by using the phrase, the mass image of self-importance, the guide is expressing that egocentric position that makes decisions based on me and mine. So when I teach the 3 spheres of consciousness, the individual self-sphere, the universal self-sphere, and the universal sphere, the individual self-sphere, as we grow up as social animals, can begin to include family, friends, villages, nations. We can still have an individual self-sphere outlook, even though we include other people in our perception. But that is different from seeing another person's perspective who doesn't agree with us, has a different point of view, and is making us uncomfortable. So surrounding ourselves with people who agree with us only insulates us more and makes us ever more certain that our point of view is correct because everybody agrees with us. And the question is, have you ever looked at life from a different perspective? Have you ever gone outside yourself? Have you ever talked to or interviewed or read or explored other points of view, so that you begin to see, I have my point of view, and it's not necessarily a bad point of view. And this person has their point of view, and it does interfere with mine. But what's going on here? And where can there be a meeting of these? And for instance, the phrase globalization that is thrown around a lot right now is about the different nations on the planet starting to find areas of compromise and areas of agreement so that they can begin to work in concert together instead of antagonistically, only taking care of themselves. This is what I'm referring to when I talk about the fact that it is possible to grow into adulthood and still have a childish perception of the world, and a lower self that acts out frequently and without regard for anyone else. Because very often towns, nations, villages do the same thing. Nations can do the same thing, where they are acting out based on their own need and not seeing the larger reality, which not only would help others, but would in the long run help them. So I'm talking here about there's an innate lower self in child consciousness. The next point she makes is about karma and the lower self. And this gets into the spiritual qualities of Pathwork cosmology and how Pathwork looks at things. So in terms of lower self and karma, the way she expresses it is that every incarnation is just another rung in the ladder on the evolution of the spirit as it engages with negativity and learns to resolve it and become bigger, more aware, more enlightened, more willing to see other points of view. So incarnation by incarnation, karma is an accounting system to keep track of where you are. And if you do not feel comfortable with the idea of incarnation, you can think of it simply in terms of what have you learned in this lifetime. Most people don't believe the same things they believed 10 years ago. Why? Because we grew. Because we started to recognize other perspective, other points of view. We lived our lives a little differently, and we expanded our knowledge of human behavior and of ourselves. So whether you wish to think of this in terms of incarnations, or you want to think of this in terms of just the different decades and the growth period in a single individual human life, the concept of karma can still apply, being that, I believe it's an Old Testament phrase, you reap what you sow. So that if you put out a lot of negativity in the world, you will cause an effect, you will have that come back at you. When you're only talking about one lifetime, it's easier to see the cause and effect. On a spiritual level, if you do accept the idea of multiple incarnations, imagine, if you would, that you are receiving negativity in this lifetime because of negative you put out in the world, carelessly and inappropriately or with deliberate evil intention, 5 lifetimes ago. It is very, very difficult for us to really accept that what's happening in our life today is fair when we do not remember how this was generated. Again, I like real-world examples. It's like being born with the feeling that there's somebody else's credit card debt, and you have inherited it. And you go through life with this huge debt, saying, but I didn't spend the money. I didn't buy the boat. I didn't buy the house. I didn't buy the things. I didn't get the pleasure. But I've got all the bills. That's what karma can feel like sometimes if you cannot connect cause and effect. Now, a lot of cause and effect happens right in this lifetime, so you don't have to go back to past lives. But in a situation where in this lifetime you are dealing with a very large number of negative circumstances, it can be supportive to consider that if life is fair, you bear some responsibility for this, and that by working with these situations, by attempting to be honorable, kind, understanding, generous, and loving, you can move through these situations with grace, despite their negativity or their seeming unfairness. In effect, what the concept of karma is, that you are working off karma by your attitude to what you're dealing with, so that you can grow spiritually simply by enlarging your attitude and seeing a bigger point of view, and not choosing to act out and try to demand instant justification or instant justice for what you see in front of you. So what I'm speaking to here is that if we choose fear, if we choose revenge, from a karmic standpoint, we're building negativity. If we choose to attempt to understand, however imperfectly we enact that, we are choosing a positive attitude. So I don't really care to teach karma, and I don't want to shove it down someone's throat, and I don't know the attitudes of the people listening to this tape. But I wanted to mention that because a lot of spiritual philosophies work with the concept of karma. And the reason I wanted to mention it is that lower self likes to pretend that it doesn't deserve what's happening. And that by working with the concept of karma, we might be able to get a larger perspective that actually covers several lifetimes and realize that even though we don't understand what's happening, this negativity that's in front of us, this difficulty that we have to move through, may have been something that was set in motion by us. Now, even if it wasn't set in motion by us, even if what I'm saying is not true, you either move through it with grace and positive intention, or you go into fear and resistance and anger about it. I have found that simply saying whatever and embracing the situation allows me to move through a situation more easily and with a more positive attitude than simply saying it's not mine, this is not fair, and I'm going to kick my heels on the floor and cry about it. So that part leads me to a summary, and that is that the Pathwork Perspective of lower self, negativity, karma, incarnation is based upon the idea that we are here to purify our souls. We are here to feel the negativity that is within us, to allow it to move without acting upon it. That, for instance, when we feel anger and we feel, well, I'm angry and it's unjustified, part of the purification is not trying to find a target for this anger. Allowing the anger, allowing the movement, working with the anger as best we can, find therapy, find whatever tools you feel you need to do this. To allow the anger, to allow the feelings, but to not attempt to justify it by pinning the reasons on a particular circumstance, unless it is momentarily justified. So someone steps on my toe and I'm angry and they did it and I can be angry at them, but once they get off my foot, once they move away and let me be, if I continue to be angry, that is very likely not about the circumstance. That's very likely about something else. Now, I'm not talking about residue. It might take a few moments to calm down. But to be angry for an hour about your foot being stepped on instantly means that something else is going on. And the Pathwork Perspective is that's your opportunity to start taking a look at what's going on at your inner life and working that out and purifying it to the place where you are appropriately angry on a given situation in a given time period. And you allow your feelings to move, and you don't try to solve other situations with the wrong situation. You don't do displacement. That in that way, we are clearing our soul of negativities. And whether you believe that that is a several lifetime process or a single lifetime process doesn't really change the process itself of self-analysis, of looking at your feelings and looking at your actions and looking at your negativities, finding out where they are coming from within you, and addressing as carefully and as responsibly as you can the causes that you find. So that's the presentation on facing the lower self. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I have agreed to do up to a 1-hour session after this ends to answer questions if you don't feel like being tape recorded for your questions. But if anybody has some right now, I'm willing to answer. Okay, so we'll end this presentation, and I thank you very much for being here. I have enjoyed working with the topic. And for those of you who wish to join me, I'll be back on the phone in about 20 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jan.
Bye.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jan. Bye. Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Love. Be still and know that I am God, that I am with you. Be still and feel that I am real in every light, in every shadow. Be still and know I never left your side, not since